Any pecuniary interest, please declare that now or further down the agenda. And we're going to start off with a delegation from Hugh Spencer and Robert Burnett from the Museum Planning Partners. Welcome, sirs.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be back here. I notice you turned the temperature down in honor of our coming. But it is very be here to speak to you again, this time for the feasibility study. It's always exciting to work with the Bruce County Museum and Cultural Center because they are widely known as practice leaders for community museums in Ontario, and I think Canada and maybe the world. And it's always exciting to see how they're be a part of their evolutionary process. So I'm going to be standing at the podium for most of the time. My colleague Robert is just back from Saudi Arabia, and he's a little tired, so he's going to sit back here, but I may call to come up and elucidate a few points, particularly on the financials, because I need to get my glasses changed. So I'm going to start in with the study. First of all, you turn it the right way. Our commission here was to look at the last time we spoke here, we were talking about the results of the accommodation plan, and the feasibility study really builds on the results of that. And so we came up with two recommended options from the accommodation plan, and we wanted to investigate and document how feasible those options were. And not so much in terms of yes, no, but the conditions of feasibility, what has to be done and what resources are needed to make these a reality. We also wanted to provide a future framework for your future decisions regarding use of space and also location. We do have some pretty clear recommendations about how we are suggesting you develop the museum and center in the future and where it could be situated. We also want to make sure that you are dealing with accurate information and documentation, especially in the areas of operating and capital budget projections, so you know what this is going to cost for you. So the result of that is a final report, which we're quite proud of, and we thank the museum and the community for their help. Just briefly, the methodology for the feasibility. We conducted 14 interviews with community stakeholders. I was actually quite interested with the vital signs presentation this morning because much of what they were saying, if we get into it, was quite consistent with what we picked up. These were fairly extensive interviews with a variety of service groups and people involved with the museum and different functions in the community, and they usually lasted a minimum of an hour, with some structured questions, and the results were documented and are currently held in a confidential appendices because we wanted to make sure everyone could say what they need to say. We looked at 6 key documents relating to culture, recreation, tourism, and development. This is actually a very good time to be doing this study because these things were emerging as we were able to draw on those results. We held 3 planning sessions with museum and archive staff, and we carried out a fundraising assessment of the community. And for that, we brought in the firm of Funding Matters based in Toronto to provide some expert. They actually helped with some of the consultation meeting sessions as well. First of all, interesting is how the initiative for developing the museum really builds on and is consistent and supports what's happening at the provincial level, what's happening with the overall museum strategic plan, and really starts to it all builds and is very consistent. So we looked at how this expansion of the museum and archives build into what the province are. And if you look at the strategic planning, the growth document from the province, their goals are to promote cultural engagement and inclusion, strengthen the role of culture in communities, and fuel the creative economy. Again, I found it very interesting. That's very consistent with some of the things we saw in the Vital Signs report. And this is, again, when we look at the strategic plan that the museum had done, and again, was the start of the accommodation study, then the feasibility study. The strategic plan responds to those provincial goals and embraced them with its 5 strategic pillars. Which are to forge partnerships and relationships. I'm sure you're not new to these concepts. Providing compelling and relevant programming, optimizing the use of space. Again, that was something a very high priority for both of these studies we've worked on with you. To create community-wide awareness. And again, that comes up in the consultation issues. And to develop, find out what resources that are required. I have to admit, working very closely with Kathy, I did a great deal, and Micah at Funding Matters, of the interviews. And we found sort of three common threads. And if you look at the final report, we elucidate on that. But there is a pretty intense interest in the museum and center throughout the county. And I sort of call them one area. One is that the museum is a partner. People are very interested in various organizations and groups are very interested in working with the museum, and they find the museum to be a good and effective partner to work with. People like the museum experience. One of the phrases that came out several times in the accommodation study and in the feasibility study was that this is a big city museum in a smaller community. They really feel they're getting a high quality heritage and cultural experience. And the museum is a place, people like to come here. Or there to go to the museum. It's sort of, again, one of the models that came up a lot in the discussions was the idea of the museum as sort of the core of a community hub. You know, and that area around it is very interesting and pleasant, and a place that people feel a lot of pride and a sense of identity and identification with. It wasn't all sunshine. Again, what we usually actually found in some ways the drive, as you recall, you know, the museum just completed an expansion in 2005, and in sort of in the memory of communities of this nature, that's yesterday. That's not very long ago, but it's very, and in some ways it's the museum's successes from its work in the 2005 work since then that's leading to the requirement, the desire for some improvements. One is the issue of location and mandate. One of the things that came up, people tended to sometimes said, well, is this Southampton's museum, you know, and not Bruce County's museum? And again, well, the museum has to exist somewhere. That's the reality in a sense. But is there some way of extending the presence of the museum through satellite presence or through programming that we can open it up and create a greater sense of identification throughout the county? The site in the building. People do love a lot of aspects of the site. They love the grounds, they love the lobby when they come in, they love the staircase and the mixture, particularly the mixture of new and heritage architecture. The issue around that, they actually could just get a sense that it was getting a little crowded. You know, and a little awkward in some of the use of the spaces, and there were some events they would like to have had there that they couldn't. There were some questions about that. Again, it wasn't so much that they thought it was a bad place to be, it was that they wanted more of what they liked there. More generalized use of technology. There's a drive for greater degrees of interactivity, digital culture, non-tangible culture to support the exposure to the collections. That's certainly not unique to the Bruce County Museum, but it actually could represent an opportunity for you, particularly with the CRTC's recent decisions to improve seeing internet access as a basic right to Canadians. That means that things will be a lot faster soon, hopefully, and this might be an opportunity for you to build up some of the digital programmings. Improve programming and services. Again, people really are, and I'm not just trying to be nice to you because I can be mean if I have to, but I'm just trying to give you a reality. There is a good response. People like using the programs. There was a desire to investigate the need for more French language programming, came very strongly. But also the urge to increase the presence of First Nations and involve in a First Nations programming. Again, not seeing that the museum is underrepresented, but more seeing that there's an opportunity there and there's a population there that could be served and get a good, meaningful use of the museum. So these are, I would definitely say that the improvements needed fall in the category of constructive criticism and presenting some useful options for you as you develop. I'm not going to go into too much of this because I don't want to get myself in trouble with Bill and Micah, who did a lot of the fundraising interviewing work. But what we did say that in overall, the position of undertaking a fundraising campaign in this region are pretty good. The 2005 campaign actually has made you accustomed to this process. There are the right number of community leaders and ways of organizing themselves and doing this thing. There are resources and funds out there. Again, I love that we get to present at the last because we get to learn from the previous presenters. Because the discussion about from the Community Foundation about the granting they're giving, they're actually talking about some similar sizes of numbers in terms of fundraising that we're talking about in some ways. So there is that. As we get into it later, and we give you a methodology in the feasibility study about how you can build up for that next phase, which relates to a plan that we're hoping to do, the next steps here. We did. You may want to consider the roles of bringing in professional fundraisers to leverage the impact, even though you do actually have some fairly experienced and professional fundraiser in the community who are very experienced with it. So that's something for you to discuss and consider. I'm going to go right to the key recommendations because I'm sure that's what you want to do, and I could tell you war stories about how much fun I had doing the study all morning. But the one thing is that we're, in the short term, recommending a new archives building, and that is our primary recommendation. You want it adjacent to or connected with the museum building. We're recommending it to meet the future needs of the next 15 years, to integrate some new public spaces specifically designed to allow for heritage awareness and training of students, seniors, and participation from community organizations across the county. And again, that relates a little bit to some of the material we found out in our discussions with GC Houston School and also with the First Nations, that there are opportunities for more programming in that area that could be built in around this. So this is sort of a way of building on that. And again, building on some of the areas of improvement and areas of success that we identified in the consultation process. I just want to emphasize, you can look at these in detail later because it's kind of hard to make out. These are not architectural plans. These are massing studies so that we could cost out the capital and operating costs, and also to find out what we can do. But we actually found, yeah, it could work. We had two options. Robert, my eyes are giving out. You want to tell me the options, the locations of the options there?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
There are two options for locating the new archives. There's the options to locate it over the area which is currently a community garden, which is to the left, or behind the garages of the manse at the other end. Both allow direct connection with the museum, so you enter the museum, you are serviced and ticketed, hang your coats up, and then proceed to the part of the museum and archives which you wish to use. So there are two ways of achieving that, and both areas of land will accommodate the proposed scope of the project.
Thank you. So if you look at, we broke down level by level what can happen on each one. The first level of the archive building is that we're looking at non-artifact material currently in the museum can be centralized in a designated non-artifact storage space on the first level, consolidate it all, make it more organized. Currently it's distributed throughout the buildings, and that's not very efficient in terms of use of space or use of staff. If you go to the second level, we have an opportunity to increase your public's program space with the creation of a dedicated discovery center, and that relates to the identified need for more interactive and educational programming, and this is where you get into First Nations programming. We even talked a bit about maybe consolidating with some elders programming, or also working with school groups. Reestablishes the washroom on this floor and consolidates staff functions on the upper level, which we'll get into. Is there anything you want to add to that, Robert? Or? On the third level, the former archives holding area is converted to a space for museum small size collections holding. There's some consistency there we can build on. Also, it allows for the staff to be consolidated on one floor, which I think will enhance our opportunity for grading, sharing of ideas and teamwork. I don't know about you in your daily life, but when you get people spread across a building, the silos tend to abound. Actually, we didn't pick up a lot of silo thinking at the museum. They do a lot of work keeping that together, but you have to see how things emerge over time, and if the layout and architecture of a building can help promote that teamwork and efficient use of staff ingenuity, so much the better. The longer-term recommendation is for an off-site collection storage facility. And I think if you've been to the Curatorial Center at the Waterloo Region Museum, you'll see something similar to that. It's, the idea is to have sort of to keep all the collections managed off that site. Again, you'll see the massing study we've done for that. I guess the other thing to ask, the one thing you should mention, that this actually also allows for collections throughout the county to be centralized and kept in one space, which again will help the museum, at least in terms of its operations and work, to become more of, perceived as more of a county-wide resource. Okay, I think we'll just move to the next slide, because that's the big, Robert, do you want to talk about that a bit?
I can. This slide focuses on what the program changes are. So in the original accommodation study, there was identified a need for more program space, more gallery space, more collection space. And so in looking at it at this stage, these are the kinds of things that we're looking at. We're looking at almost a 2,000 square foot increase in gallery space, meaning the Discovery Gallery and the Community Voices Gallery. We're looking at a 6,400 square foot increase in the archival space, collection space within the building, 1,700 square feet, and as you can read. So on all the measures that were identified in the accommodation study, everyone has seen an increase in the available space in the near term, and more importantly, for the long term. And I think that puts you in an excellent position to get several decades out in your thinking. I think that, go ahead, if you want to hit the button. What does that mean? In any feasibility study, there are two parts. The first part is, does the program being presented achieve the community's vision and ambitions? And Hugh has spoken to that. The answer is yes. What is being proposed addresses the issues raised by the stakeholders and by the community and by the staff. The second part of any feasibility study is, okay, what's it going to cost me? And that's where we have to get very mechanical because dollars are very real. A new archives building will cost just under $2 million. In order to benefit most, obviously, we have to reuse the existing archive space, $750,000. We need to fit out the new spaces. The numbers are here. We need to hire an architect. We need to have a project manager, a contractor. We need a feasibility. We need a fundraising, and we need to pay people to help us fundraise. And in any good planning, we have to plan for the unknown and allow for a contingency. It's our estimate that to achieve a new archives building at the scale and areas described by the project will be about $5.3 million. Additionally, longer term, the off-site collections management facility is about $2.6 million. Each of them has a fundraising component, and if we look at the next page, we can see that the county contribution for the archives is projected at less than 23%, and for the off-site storage, less than 20%. We feel that if Funding Matters projection of $3 to $4 million fundraising is very feasible, that fundraising can carry the bulk of these projects. We assume some levels of government grants, particularly for things like fit out and equipment. And of course, we respect the contribution that the Archive Trust, which already exists, will make to achieving this goal. Having built it, there are obviously going to be operating costs. The operating costs for the new archives are less than $220,000 a year. That includes staffing costs and all the associated administrative costs for the building. For the off-site collections management, about $135,000 a year. These are very solid numbers, tested in the marketplace. The exclusions are noted in the full report, so they do not include the purchase of land. They do not include if the architect decides to build this in heritage wood or encrusted diamonds.
Frank Gehry builds you a nice.
Or Frank Gehry does you a roof. But there are sufficient budgets to allow any qualified architect to give you a significant building, not a standard building, the next level up, a significant building.
Which is sort of a standard you've already established.
Which is why we established the costing at that level. So we think we've not just correctly priced, projected the building, but its fit out, the staff it'll take to make it live, and the fundraising that will make it financially feasible. I'm happy to answer any questions on any part of the report. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, the next steps.
Next steps, but
My apologies.
since you're here, Robert.
Since I'm standing here and have made a fool of myself, I think the first obvious step is to test the financial feasibility of the fundraising projection. I think that's a very, very good and very critical part of the steps forward. I also think it's obvious that we have to choose a north or south option, and that comes right down to what land are we able to acquire at what price and at what speed. And then we obviously need an architect to take the budget proposed and say, this is the building I can give you for the budget you have. And I think that's exactly the way you should do it. Not say, give me a beautiful archive building, but give me a beautiful building for this price. It should be absolutely achievable. And then there's just the messy work of going out and getting the money. And I think from everything we've heard, from the community, from the fundraising professionals, well, that will be a hill to climb. It is a climb that can be achieved with the usual amount of sweat and effort. To say otherwise would be to mislead you. But holistically, new archives, an expanded and improved museum facility, and an off-site collections management to address long-term needs are achievable. I thank you for your patience, and again, I offer to try to respond to any questions.
Thank you very much, both of you. It's a great report. Are there any questions from council members on this? Robert.
You said back in 2005, that's when the last major capital thing that was done. How much money was raised at that time, and like how much money from the public? Like this seems like a tremendous amount of money here to raise, but in 2005, that whatever was raised probably seemed like a tremendous amount of money at that time too. Mm-hmm. Do you have that figure? How much, roughly, how much money?
So I'd be happy to answer that question. So from the public fundraising perspective at that time, it was just under $1.5 million. So there was a fundraising committee. They were initially part of the original Friends of the Museum group, and they undertook that. So it was a capital campaign that ran specifically for the new build, so it didn't include any of the other grants, so any of the provincial or federal grants. That was strictly individuals donating. And part of our challenge in general from a fundraising perspective is after we completed that, we still need, there's still that base of individuals there. So how do we, and some of them are still contributing to us on a yearly basis. So what's the next big thing for them to invest in as well? but it was just under $1.5 million. Okay.
Thanks, Robert. Are there any other questions? Mitch?
Stakeholder process of doing interviews, you mentioned that there was 14 engagement pieces that you had. Where were those interviews from? Like, were they scattered around the county?
Yeah. We tried to be as diverse as we could. I think we in the report we have, or we provide you with a list of who we interviewed. We tried to get a range of people from different areas, but also from different, like, in different fields in the community. So there was a lot blanking. I never know.
So I can answer a couple of the individuals that we looked towards. We interviewed the Bruce County Historical Society, the Genealogical Society. We interviewed service club members. We interviewed community members themselves. We also engaged with the Blue Water District School Board. We engaged with GC Houston. We engaged with the town of Saugeen Shores through the study that the work that they had completed, because we wanted to make sure that any of the existing work that had been completed, we weren't just not looking at that material at all. But I do have a complete list, and
We also spoke to the representative of the First Nations.
and First Nations, yes, were included in that too. Yeah.
It was fun. It was actually quite fascinating getting a temperature of this, because again, what I don't want to try and sell you on things, but what I really did pick up was, again, a very positive overall response to the museum, which is always the case. I mean, when you do these sorts of consultations, but also some concerns, as we mentioned here, but also the belief that probably some development was necessary, at just about every level. So.
Thank you. Mayor Inglis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned that the numbers are pretty well confirmed as far as estimates. There's one line that I have a question about. The county partner, $500,000 in brackets other county. Do you have any indication that another county might be interested in partnering with the off-site facility?
We don't. And that county partner could be another county to partner with, or another county department to partner with. The way that the off-site storage facility has been proposed is two independent modules separated by a large loading dock area. And we propose to occupy the first cell immediately as we need it, because we don't need it today. We won't need it for the first couple of years with the expansion to the archives and to the museum collection storage. But when we do it, we'll occupy the first cell. We can either choose not to immediately build the second cell, or we can build it in partnership with Gray, who is, we know, looking for a long-term storage solution, or with some other department within Bruce itself. What we're saying is there is seldom a department in any county which does not have a space problem. This is stable environment. It can be climate controlled, pest controlled, etc. So it's a good place if you wanted to store other things and take it away from high cost storage spaces. One of the things the proposal does for the museum, for example, is free up space within the museum, which is currently basically storing old showcases or costumes that are only used on a seasonal basis. That limits what we can do with that space year-round. So I'm confident that the second cell will find a use, and we've costed it so that it would be there in the budget. But there is the option to build the first cell in the loading dock and not to build the second cell, or not to build it at the same time. But I'm also looking to, this is a long-term plan, and if there's space, it will be filled. So we took that into account, thinking we've got to go out at least 20 years.
Yeah, and you also have a network of smaller museums throughout Bruce County that may have need for off-site storage as well.
It's one thing we could not measure, but which we are aware of and have certainly discussed with the director, is there's likely to be a shrinkage in museums in Ontario. Small museums are under tremendous pressure. Volunteerism is changing either by disaster, a roof leaks, a fire happens, or the volunteers all simply get too old. There is no place in the county to preserve that collection while it is analyzed and dispersed in an appropriate manner. This allows for that emergency. If Paisley's outstanding collection of 19th century lighting lost its home, it would take a while to disperse it effectively. This allows for those kinds of emergencies. We're not building it because the emergencies are there. There are other day-to-day purposes, but it allows for such emergencies to occur and be addressed within the county.
Just to add to that point, the other potential is from an archaeological perspective.
Yes.
So in London, they have sustainable archaeological holdings, so people actually pay to have their collection held within a center. So those are things that we're seeing a little bit of movement on the archaeological side right now as well, especially in regards to some issues with repatriation. So potentially there's that to put into the mix as well.
Interesting. Anybody else? Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is around the financial feasibility study, and I've heard of them, but I just wonder what you get out of them. Where do they test your assumptions and say, yes, there is a likelihood that you're going to be successful? Do they give you a path, or do they give you some objectives in some way of accomplishing those goals then?
We don't do fundraising, which is why we hired Funding Matters, but we've worked with many of them, and the answer is yes. A financial feasibility study should identify who your leadership teams are, what we think each sector might be able to bring in, who the likely leads are. So they will take the projection we've made and say, yes. In the early discussions with Funding Matters, they said 5 million should not be a stretch. So we've been quite conservative. I always feel that sometimes, I don't wish to sound, because I live in Waterloo, you know, I'm used to horse and buggy speed. I sometimes think that in Toronto they think that 5 million isn't a lot of money or 4 million isn't a lot of money. In Waterloo it's a lot of money. And I'm sure in Bruce it's a lot of money. So not being experts in fundraising, I took their conservative at 3 to 4, and I challenged them to prove that that's a good number. I believe it's a reasonable number based on my experience with other counties and with other projects. I'm comfortable with that as a conservative estimate, but I would be imprudent not to advocate someone who does this every day and who is comfortable into reaching into people's pockets on a daily basis. Look at this and verify it. And I think it's money well spent to have that done.
One way of looking at it is that the process you've been through and many museums do, and that you develop community museums, is that these are grassroots movements. And it often just takes time to mobilize the resources in the community. And in some ways, fundraising consultants, and again, I'm not trying to sell anybody, is just to point out the reality is that this process of the fundraising feasibility study is to try and jumpstart that process and identify who the players are in the process and what they have to do, because it speeds it up rather than having to discover it yourself.
The other thing with fundraising, and it's the difference between 2005 and 2018. The nature of giving has changed. The generational giving patterns have changed. You see this, I'm a supporter of TVO and Doctors Without Borders and a number of different charities, and these days they want a monthly donation rather than a check once a year. And the younger generation are very much moving to that. It's easier for them to manage than to try to find $1,500 or $500, you know, at Christmas time. So I think what the professional fundraisers can bring is an understanding of how asking has changed. I was part of the Royal Ontario Museum's fundraising campaigns over a number of years. And I remember my chairman very clearly when he retired saying, I'm so glad I'm retiring and people will stop crossing the road when they see me coming because I've reached into their pockets 2 or 3 times. That takes a professional to say what is possible in any community. And it takes a professional working with the community representatives to say how best that can be done. Is it by local recruitment or is it by external experts? That's a discussion that has to take place. But today fundraising is very professional. And it's not just people, you know, going out as they used to with the hat and passing it. $4 million is a big ask. They'll want to know how it's going to be spent. They'll want proper you know, plans that they can be shown to be the project they want to support. All of this takes a structure. But again, I think it's eminently feasible.
Thank you, gentlemen. Are there any other questions from council? Mill.
The operating costs, the incremental operating costs, is that an annual fee?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes. And much, you know, you're going to have some additional staff. You've got.
That's not included, though.
Oh, no, the cost of the staff is included. Additional.
Yeah, that's oh.
Yeah. So if you let me just find the chart.
It's $350,000 a year.
For a sec, can I get the right chart? And there we go.
Oh, yes, I see it there now. I
So,
do see it, 122.5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, utilities alone,
Yeah.
you know, $40,000.
Yeah.
The staffing, that's 2 full-time people, because you're running a shift situation weekdays and weekends, so you need staff to cover that. Just keeping the asset maintained, $40,000. So I think $220,000 is reasonable for archives. Obviously, the off-site space doesn't require the same quality of attendance because it's basically a climate-controlled warehouse with 1 staff person basically making things accessible. So if, say, the municipality needed to get some records that were in long-term storage, the person could manage that response, that request. So again, the utilities are the big one. The next are salaries. And that's really 1 salaried position.
It says it doesn't represent the ongoing cost to maintain the value of the investment, but that's...
Well, we tried to reflect that in the projected facility maintenance and in the landscaping. That keeps the building up, the
So it does
windows
represent-
repaired. It does include all of that kind of cost.
Okay. Thank you.
It does not include, obviously, the cost of the land because we don't know where it is.
Oh, big numbers. Does anybody else have any questions? No? Oh, yes. Sorry, Paul.
So on the next steps with that financial feasibility study, I scrolled through here, but I didn't see a cost that, like, I guess in my mind, whether this whole thing's pie in the sky or not, doesn't really matter. The next step really is a financial feasibility study.
Yep.
And what cost was associated with that? I didn't see that in your documentation.
In the capital budget projection page, we said $30,000. And it's included in the $5.3 million project cost from the archives. We want to keep the number small. 30,000 should be able to get that assessment done. And also should allow you to have a dialogue about the larger cost of fundraising. Revenue Canada says that any charity can spend up to 17% of what is raised for the cost of raising money. We're only assuming roughly 10%, $350,000 to raise $4 million. Now, how that's invested is something that obviously the director and the fundraising team in Bruce will have to discuss with whoever they choose, whether it's a firm, an individual, or a professional. That's a matter to be discussed, but is budgeted.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think that's definitely our next step. I think it's, unfortunately, I think we have to spend this $30,000 to tell us we can't afford it.
You may also wish to do it in parallel with an architect, at least giving you an architectural concept, because it's easy to sell and test a concept if there's some visual. I mean, our plans are a massing plan. It'll show what functions are in the building and at what scale. But people don't get excited about a floor plan. A nice little architectural rendering that is in budget, and that should be the emphasis time and time again. There's a very reasonable budget of just under $2 million, and that's a construction budget because there's separate architectural fees and contractor fees budgeted. You know, asking an architect to give you a concept for what a $2 million building in Bruce in 2018-19 will look like should be a straightforward request.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Any final questions? Thank you again. Really appreciate your presentation. Gives us lots to think about and debate.
Anything we can do?
Yes.
Thank you.
And thank you for having us, and very much thank you for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So, moving to the action item, we have a recommendation that the feasibility study for the Bruce County Museum and Cultural Center dated February the 8th, 2017 is received for discussion, and staff will return with further recommendations for the April committee meeting. Any further comment or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That's okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Can I have a mover? Mayor Smith, seconded by Mayor Buckle. All in favor? Thank you, that's carried. So now we go down to the information items, and we have the business and, where is it? Oh, it's too long.
Okay,
Yeah.
so.
Let's go ahead. I'm still
Finally down. I think
scrolling.
I'm at page 105 or something
Okay.
like that. So again, just going into our business and sponsorship report, you know, continuing along our strategic plan and our partnership, as our partnerships are very important to us for a number of reasons. You'll see that we've been able to secure some more funds for our ancient civilization programming through the assistance of the Lions Club. And we, you know, again, very timely with the Community Foundation coming and doing their presentation. We're reaching out to them in regards to sponsorship for an upcoming exhibit. We have been funded in the past from Community Foundation, so we're looking for their support again. And then for another exhibition that is coming up, My Story, My Tattoo, we're looking at local businesses for sponsorship. And actually, an ask has also gone out to OMAFRA in regards to Fields of Dreams, because we feel that the agricultural component of that is a nice fit with that group as well. Moving along, we have the education and outreach report. So again, just recapping on our programming that we've done with the Valentine's program, which was a great holiday program, and we're continuing to incorporate elements of the collection and or the archives in this type of programming for the children. Next coming up will be Easter egg hunting, and then again, we'll get into more seasonal later on in the year. Today, when I get back to the museum, we are hosting the second or the 6th annual Heritage Fair for GC Houston, which is part of the regional fair. So all of the kids will be coming in. They'll be adjudicated today. I think we have approximately in the neighborhood of 20 to 22 projects, which is really great as well, because in the past, the students weren't given a choice. They were asked to do Heritage Fair. In the past couple of years, they've been asked to choose between Science Fair and Heritage Fair, and we're still getting a number of the students that are participating and wanting to do the Heritage Fair component. So we've partnered with the library on this project as well, getting them involved so that the students can work locally at the Southampton Library as using the library for research as they do with the archives. So tonight we'll have an open house. for all the parents and the community members to come and see the project, so everyone's welcome if you happen to be in the neighborhood. And at this point, we have 5 spots for students to move on to the regional fair, and the regional fair will take place on April 20th, I believe, at Grey Root. So, and we've had a number, we've had 2 students from GC Houston in the past few years move on to the provincial fair through this process. So we're very excited about continuing this process. I also heard that another school within Saugeen Shores has also now started Heritage Fair. So we've reached out to them to see going forward how we can be a resource for the students as well. And hopefully we'll start to grow this in more of the schools over the next few years. March break just around the corner. So our new education programmer has been diligently working on programming for that. And I think we're getting close to capacity on the day camps as well. So we'll have day camp programming during March break, but we'll also do specialty programming, drop-in programs for families to come on through the week. The next item that we have is one that has been on in particular, the museum's business plan for a while, and it is part of the operational review recommendation, which the original recommendation talked about a revised tourism strategy. And the revised tourism strategy was really to try and initially to see how we could work on a longer stay tourist trade. So in particular, we're going back to 2015, but we had worked on what I would term a very tactical plan with planning and economic development to come up with some ideas around that. And in hindsight, it was really premature. So as you're aware, economic development and planning have gone through a period of restructuring their portfolios and their initiatives. So while that was happening, we were still doing some research on our own in regards to, what does culture look like? What does heritage look like in a bigger tourism type of picture? And it was really interesting because in the research that we undertook, only one of the municipalities has a cultural plan in place. Many of the municipalities have culture as part of embedded in different documents throughout their planning, and a lot of them have, of course, the heritage committees. So there's elements of culture and heritage throughout. Obviously, the museum is a large stakeholder, if you want to look at us that way from a heritage and culture perspective, but also library in terms of the work that's being done through the libraries and throughout Bruce County. But then we need to think about, all the other cultural assets that are within the county as well. And the timing, again, sometimes it's all in the timing, but, it also, we looked at the documents that came out through the Ontario Culture Strategy, which I presented last year, as well as the OMA Strategic Vision and Action Plan. So taking a look at all of these kind of things that are happening in our area, sitting down and through conversation with economic development and planning and our colleagues at library, and also looking a little bit further out in terms of what other counties are doing, we really sat down and had some good conversations. So it's a bigger picture rather than just going into the tactical components right away. Huron County has completed a cultural plan back in 2014. In conversations with Huron, they said that it was an absolutely worthwhile process and that they are actually able to start to implement a lot of the recommendations from the plan. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but they've just announced in Huron County they're going to be turning Goderich into a Harry Potter kind of village for a couple of days in October. Those type of ideas are part of what came out of the planning and the implementation of the plan. To my knowledge, they had to set up 2 intakes for tickets, and they were sold out within 2 to 3 hours of doing this process. So now they have to deliver, which I'm confident that they will, because there's a great group of people working on that as well, not just people at the county level, but also volunteers and other community stakeholders. So with all that kind of in mind, you know, when we sat down again and looking at the different needs or what are the different things that we could look at, one of the other gaps that was identified through the planning process was in relations in particular to First Nations heritage and the settlement patterns. So the Director of Planning and Economic Development had identified that as a gap, and part of a cultural analysis or cultural plan could actually assist with that work. So moving forward, what we're going to be proposing is that we look at doing the development of a comprehensive assessment of cultural partners and assets for the county, and in the terms of developing it through a cultural action plan. And what we would like to do is make sure that we're doing this as part of the budget process for 2018, so this will be part of the process that will develop working forward, and making sure that this document or this planning process becomes part of the overall development of the 2018 budget. But it will be a collective and a collaborative effort between museum, library, and economic development. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about that report. No questions?
There's no questions at all? Okay.
Okay. So the next item that we have on here is our programming report. So again, we've been running in partnership with our friends at Sheeter. We've been partnering with them on this reminiscence program, and we've had a number of individuals coming to the different workshops. Today is the last of the workshops, so you'll see some pictures there of some of the others that had joined in previously. Program's working really well. We're looking at several other initiatives working with Sheeter in particular, and we do have some grants in place. We're just waiting on the approval of the funding for that. Continuing with our lunch and a movie right now, Heritage Day. We had great success on Heritage Day, 532 visitors to the building. It was a happening spot, really hard to find parking, but that's a good thing for us. And again, a number of this event brings in a number of community members. So we had, you know, the spinners and weavers, we had dog sled people, we had trained people. It's just a great event, and one that gets a lot of comments from the visitors as well. And then our adventure talks, the kind of the humanitarianism focus is still continuing, and we're taking that into the April timeframe. So continuing with our slate of programming, and that will still lots more programming to come for the summer months as well.
Thanks, Kathy. Are there any questions about any of these 4 information reports? Not seeing any. So I guess with that, we'll move into closed. Can I have a motion to go into closed, please? Mayor Tulin, seconded by Mayor Eadie. All in favor? Thank you. We're in closed.